Yeah, I just connecting to the audio.
So मैंने अपने भाइयों से पूछा था कि just raise your hands whoever has done something for the house today, like a household work, or they have cooked. So there are about 16 hands पहले और 11 जने और तो
क्या बात है.
27 जने हमारे मेहनती भाई हैं जो घर के काम कर चुके हैं आज सुबह से.
Lovely.
You and me are not the only ones. ऐसी बात नहीं
Correct.
है, दुनिया और भी
Correct.
मेहनत करती है.
Absolutely correct. Bang on. So Kshitij, I think we should start. It's already 4.
You want to wait for 3-4 minutes by the time people
No,
are still joining, pouring in?
I think let's start by the time the introductions are over. So I will start, then people will be there.
एक second, sir. एक second. I'll just stop my screen.
I'll request all attendees to put the questions in Q&A so that we can compile all the questions at one chat. Otherwise, we'll have to go through the chat also and Q&A also. So request everyone to put your questions in Q&A. Thank you. Yeah, Kshitij.
Okay. So, do I start with the introduction and all, Tarunji?
You start with APP, then I'll introduce her. Yeah.
Sir, good afternoon, everybody. An early evening, maybe. And we have Tarun Bhatia as my co-host and Sunil Arora ji, who's our very renowned CA. I'm coming to the APP introduction first. APP Delhi NCR is the Delhi NCR arm of National Association of Realtors, India, NAR India, the credible voice of realtors in India. NAR India is a registered non-profit society under the Societies Registration Act of India and represents NAR US in India. APP Delhi NCR has been set up to provide the consumer with confidence and the industry professionals with a united voice. An organization representing the interest of hundreds of brokers operating all over Delhi NCR. APP Delhi NCR is a non-profit organization and aims to elevate the standards of practice of the real estate brokerage business to a global level, whose sole aim is to improve the standards of professionalism in the Delhi NCR property market. Though our reach is going beyond Delhi now, and we have members from, like we just introduced a very dear friend from Ludhiana, then there are people joining from Jaipur also. So APP, apart from uniting, creating a buzz in the market, having good networking, contacting the right developers for special deals that we create for our realtors, we have a large body, the governing body, to thank. I would take the opportunity of introducing my governing body, which is the APP governing body for the year, and have just the right start for our encouraging panel. We have our secretary, Gagan Pal Singh. We have our treasurer and president-elect, Mr. Nitin Jain. Tarun Bhatia obviously is our chairman and advisory board member. Shobit Batra is our joint secretary. Sameer Chopra, advisory board member. Atul Khera, an old friend. He's the past president also. He's in the advisory board. Abhishek Jain, just the right one. He's also the past president and now is in the advisory board. Ashwin Jain is the last year's president. He's the past president. Ricky Sharma ji, he's one of the governing body members. Tarun Jain, Timi Buddhiraja, Vivek Gupta, Harinder Saluja ji, Rajiv Saluja, Anuja Sinha, Mitesh Podar, Gitender Gupta, who are doing wonderfully well. They all have been behind all these creations, reach, networking, reaching out to members, non-members, and doing a fabulous job for everybody. And we are here thanks to each one of them from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Over to you, Tarun.
Thank you, Kshitij. I hope I'm clear. Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the webinar on taxation of real estate transactions organized by APP Delhi NCR. We thank you all for taking out time to attend this webinar. I am Tarun Bhatia, and I am the chairman of APP and also the president-elect NAR India. This is the third webinar organized by APP since last week. The other two being on marketing strategies going forward and real estate market post-lockdown. And we are really overwhelmed by the responses received from our members and fellow realtors for these webinars. And therefore, APP is planning a few more. So please stay tuned on our Facebook page or with whomever you connect at APP. On the webinars, you'll only see maybe me, Kshitij, Abhishek, Gagan. But as Kshitij said, there's a full team working behind the scenes to make these webinars happen. So I and Kshitij thank everyone. Kshitij already taken everyone's name. So thank you guys. You really rock. Uh, Today we have an amazing speaker as our trainer today, CA Sunil Arora ji. I have known Sunil sir since 1987 when I was still in school. Uh, and I must confess that he's not only my mentor, but he's an inspiration for me and for so many of us who know him personally. He has helped shape many a life over the past many years. He qualified as a chartered accountant in the year 1983. He's also a postgraduate MCOM from Delhi University. He has a rich experience of practicing since 83 as a senior partner in Mrs. Sunil Arora and Associates, having its head office at New Delhi. Those who don't know, his firm is also the auditors for NAR India as well as APP Delhi NCR. He was elected to the Northern Indian Regional Council of the ICAI for the term 2001-2004 and 2004-2007. He has been a guest faculty in a number of workshops and training programs organized by ICAI for various organizations like CNAG, BHEL, IOCL, HPCL, NHPC, NTPC, etc. He has also delivered lectures, presentations on various topics of professional interest in various forums, including at various NAR and APP events. So today, Sir will discuss and throw light on some concepts like specified sum and disallowance of cash payments, Benami Property and Transaction Act and Money Laundering Act, consideration versus stamp duty value, guidance value, which is 50C, capital gains, TDS on rent and sale of immovable properties by non-resident Indians, taxation in respect to residential collaborations and agricultural land. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section and we'll try and answer most of them along with the presentation. So without much ado, I would like to hand over the bid into Sunil sir. Sir, Sunil ji, welcome aboard.
Yeah. Thank you, Tarun. Thanks for all the good words. Now, I think his words, you have to take it that they're a little biased because he knows me for a number of years. So don't just get carried away by what he's saying. Anyway, and I really appreciate the good work which is being done by NAR. I think it's really wonderful in these difficult times to organize such kind of programs. And tax as such is one of our difficult topics. So I'll try to do justice and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. So my request would be that wherever you have any queries or questions, you're most welcome to ask there and then, so that what happens is that instead of losing the connectivity, I mean, if we proceed further, then of course we'll have to get back to it. So wherever you have any question, please put it in the question and answers. And I request Tarun and Kshitij to please help me out. Sure. And you can raise the question whenever you want to. Okay, so I'll run you through a presentation where I've tried to list down a few issues which would be of interest or concern to all of us, especially the kind of participation which we have over here. Probably they should be of interest to them. There are a number of other issues which probably be there, but then you're free to ask questions beyond that also once we are through with the presentation. So I'll just put my presentation on the screen first. Okay. Okay, now I'm sure we've all been noticing that government has recently, during the last few years, the government has tried to cut down the use of cash in any kind of transactions. Not just in property, everywhere you find that there is an attempt to digitize the economy. There's an attempt to move the economy towards more organized sector through digital payments instead of cash payments. Now, as far as properties is concerned, the necessary amendment has been there right from 1st June 2015 that if I'm selling a property, I cannot receive cash exceeding 20,000 rupees. Of course, I mean, 20,000 is too small a sum for any property transaction. So the objective is to ensure that the transactions in the property get accounted for. What are the consequences agar aap isko nahi karte hain? I mean, Tarun or Kshitij, can you just help me out? What is the language you would prefer? I mean, you prefer me to remain in English, or you want me to
Sir,
have
English is good enough, and Hindi is also good enough, so you can use both wherever you are comfortable. Most of our crowd will understand both the languages, sir.
Right. I mean, because the participants, they are from Delhi region, or they are from outside Delhi
No,
also?
so they are from Pan India. If you know Kannada, Tamil, that also will help us if you can speak in both the languages. But otherwise,
if I start speaking in Kannada or Tamil, I think the rest of them are going to have a problem. So
first, sir, me and then Tarun. सबसे पहले हम घबरा जाएंगे.
Sir, English and Hindi are good enough.
Good enough.
Okay.
Yeah. Please go ahead, sir.
Right. So the point which I was trying to make was that if you're selling a property, then you cannot receive cash exceeding 20,000 rupees. If you've received some payment, and if you want to repay that due to cancellation of a property transaction or anything like this, you cannot repay cash. But in spite of this, I mean, this provision has been there for nearly 20 years now, in spite of, for 5 years now. But in spite of that, we find that even now, a number of people commit this particular mistake. So now I think as people who are instrumental in getting the transactions done, we must understand this particular thing, that there cannot be a cash transaction as far as real estate is concerned. Now the problem is not so much with the person who's purchasing the property. A purchaser of a property can withdraw money from the bank and pay. Probably there won't be much consequences as far as the purchaser of a property is concerned. But as far as seller of a property is concerned, the seller of a property can land up into a problem if he receives cash. And the penalty is so huge that the penalty is equivalent to the amount of cash which he has received. So the 100% amount is leviable as a penalty if he receives this particular amount in cash. Now, as far as cash payments is concerned, any issues in this receiving cash against a property transaction? Anybody has any clarification or any question on this?
Sir, as of now, there are no questions typed yet. People are raising their hands. Sir, if you guys can put the question in Q&A, it will be easier for us, because for raising a hand means we have to let you speak. We have to allow you to speak, which could be a chaotic situation. If you guys just can put the questions in the Q&A box, that will be really nice. So Deepak has asked a question, but we'll get back to Deepak later when you're talking about TDS on sale of property.
Okay.
Sir, as of now there are no questions. So in case there are questions, we'll ask you, sir.
Right. Okay. Now, cash payment is, as far as cash is concerned, another change which happened a couple of years back was that if you are making expenses in cash, there used to be a limit of 20,000 rupees, which was there for last 30, 35 years, 40 years, that limit was going on. So now that limit was reduced to 10,000 rupees. And here also, this is one area where we find a lot of, the people are not being able to comply with this particular provision. Say, for example, if you're paying salary to your peon, you're paying him 15, 18, 20,000 rupees, whatever. So if you pay him 20,000 rupees in cash, you land up on the wrong side of law. And as per section 48(3), that means payment of cash exceeding 10,000 rupees, the entire sum will become disallowable. So here also, although precisely, but then it is not just this. You can have situation, you go for getting your car repaired, you go to a car workshop, the bill comes out to be 23,000 rupees, you pay cash and bring back the car. In all these cases, you can have a problem. You have a problem at hand that you cannot pay more than 10,000 rupees. So you have to make sure, as far as payment of salaries is concerned, if you're paying less than 20,000 rupees to your peon, you can split it in two parts. That means pay him salary for 15 days or a weekly basis, so that it remains less than 10,000 rupees. For getting your car repaired or any such expense, use your card, whatever it is, so that you're not on the wrong side of law and you don't land up in getting your expenses disallowed. Moreover, as far as cash is concerned, why I'm talking of it, because I'll come to the major issue which would arise subsequently. Here, another issue which is there is that if you spend money on purchasing an asset, let's suppose you purchase a laptop or you purchase a car in cash, you would not be entitled to the depreciation on that particular asset if you have made the payment in cash. If you've not made it through the banking channels, through account pay check or through banking by transfer of the bank accounts and so on. So the point here is that here also you will be losing out on the depreciation if you're not doing it. Now, these were some basic provisions which have been existing. Another provision which has been brought about is that no person can receive more than 2 lakh rupees in cash from a person during a day or in respect of a single transaction or in respect of a transaction which is related to one event or occasion of a person. Now, how does this affect us? Here, the thing is that we cannot, let's suppose we are into property consulting. Now, we have a situation where we have organized a deal and the commission comes to 5 lakh rupees. Now, one of the parties, the buyer or the seller, tells that, okay, you can take cash from us. Now, here you will have a problem that if you receive cash, this amount in cash, and you account for this particular cash, you will be landing up being non-compliant with the provisions of the Income Tax Act, which provide that you cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees in cash with respect to a single transaction. And please note that you cannot even split this particular transaction. That means you cannot have a situation where 5 lakh is the total commission and you receive it in 3 parts that, okay, I'll receive 150 and 2 lakh rupees like this. It is not possible. So if it is one transaction, you cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees in cash. And here also, the penalty.
Just a small question here.
Yeah.
Are you trying to say in 1 year, if I'm doing multiple transactions of multiple properties, so every property I can receive 2 lakh rupees, or it's only once a year?
No, it has got nothing to do with the year. So it is every transaction is a separate transaction. So that means in one particular deal or one particular transaction which has happened, you cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees in cash. If the commission or the brokerage comes out to be less than 2 lakh rupees, you can very well receive it in cash, not an issue. But if it is more than 2 lakh rupees, then you can't receive it in cash. And if you should do so, then here again, the penalty is very steep. It is the amount of receipt which you have. So you can have a situation that somebody receives brokerage in cash and he puts it in his bank account and gives an explanation that I had received this in cash and I've deposited this in my bank account. Now here he would land up in a problem if he says so. So, this is another provision which is there. Although it doesn't take much to comply with this particular provision, but then just ignorance can lead a person into a problem in this situation. So now what we have is, we have very strict regulation as far as cash is concerned. We have strict regulation on accepting payments, on payment of amount, accepting payment against a property, and so on, business expenses. A number of situations are there. Now, as far as few more transactions is concerned, I cannot have 2 lakh rupees means if I cannot receive, similarly others also cannot receive. So can we have a situation like this? I go to a jewelry shop, like, of course, abhi everything is closed, but once it opens, you go to a jewelry shop with your wife and your wife likes a set which is, say, for 7 lakh rupees and you pay cash and you purchase that particular jewelry. Now you can't do that also because the jeweler, he cannot accept more than 2 lakh rupees in cash for the transactions which he's entering into. So here also there is a restriction. So number of restrictions are there as far as cash is concerned. Now, with this strict provisions which is there, my idea of giving you this background was that because these are some day-to-day transactions which we are entering into, and we can be on the wrong side of law because of because of ignorance of the provisions of the law which is there. It leads us to another situation.
Sir, we have a question here. Is there any maximum cash limit per year of total amount of brokerage? This has been asked by Mr. Paresh Patel. Is there any maximum cash limit per year of total amount of brokerage which we can accept?
There is no cash limit on total amount of brokerage. That means if you are receiving it from different parties for different transactions, even from one party for different transactions on different dates, there is no problem. Let's suppose there's a person who has 5 flats. Now I sell one of his flats. I get 1 lakh rupees commission in cash. He gives it to me on, say, 10th of February. Then the second transaction takes place on say 15th of February. I sell another of his flat. He gives me another 1 lakh rupees. There's absolutely no problem. He can give me another 1,50,000 rupees. There's no problem. So the issue here is that 2 lakh rupees transaction, 2 lakh rupees cash receipt should not exceed more than one in a particular transaction. You can have any n number of transactions during the year and receive as much amount of cash as it possible, provided it is explained. In the sense that if you say that you have received 1 crore rupees as cash commission during a particular year, you should be able to explain as to which transactions you have received this particular 1 crore. You can't have a situation that you deposit this in the bank account and simply claim this, that this is my commission during the year, so I'm prepared to pay tax on it. That probably would not help us, help you today. So there is no limit on the cash which you can receive, except for that each transaction or from a person during the day, you cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees. That is the cap which is there. But then during the year, you can have n transactions. You can have receive less than 2 lakh rupees from each person, each transaction. There is no limit to that particular thing. So now what happens is that keeping this cash transactions in background, now the provisions pertaining to any cash which is there with you, or if you have deposited in your bank account, or if you have your investment which is not explained, or if any money is found in your with you or in your premises, or investment you have not fully disclosed, say for example jewelry you have or anything like this. So you can have a situation where you can land up with very strict provisions which are there with pertaining to this. Now what happens in this scenario is, what has happened is that with effect from 1/4/2017, this provision was brought about post this demonetization period. I mean, to curb the cash during the demonetization period, this provision was brought about. But this has continued to remain in the Income Tax Act. So what happens is that you land up paying 60% tax on any such unexplained cash, and then you have a surcharge of 25% on that. Now what are we talking of? We said that we cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees for one particular transaction or an event. That's fine. I mean, you have complied with that particular provisions. You are not in, you're non-compliant. You're complying with that particular, for each transaction, you have not received more than 2 lakh rupees. But let's suppose in your bank, you have a deposit of 50 lakh rupees cash in your bank account, and you try to explain it that this is my cash receipt from various transactions of brokerage which I have received during the year, which remain unexplained. That means I'm not able to specify who gave it to me, for which property, and if I'm not able to justify that, then the assessing officer can impose a tax of 60% on this, coupled with 25% is the surcharge on this. So that means the effective rate comes to 75% in this particular case. And this is only minded, I'm talking only of tax right now. So it is only tax as 75%. And if we look at it, in addition to tax, there's a penalty also of 10%, which adds another 6%. So it becomes effectively 81%. And then you can also be prosecuted for having an unexplained cash. And then there are provisions under Benami Act, money laundering, penalty. There are other provisions which get attracted because of this particular transaction. So the point which I'm trying to say is that now, wherever you have any cash or an investment, it has to be properly explained. It has to be properly disclosed. It has become very difficult to explain any kind of cash which you have, whether cash is found in your premises, or cash is found deposited in the bank account, or cash is found utilized for making any investment. So let's suppose if you have purchased a property, or if your client has purchased a property, and it is found that besides, the official amount which he has paid on the sale deed, there is also an additional amount which he has paid in cash. So if that kind of transaction is found, then the client is going to land up in a big problem, because he would land up paying, if you look at it, even if Benami transaction is not there, he would land up paying 81% tax on the transaction, which is the unaccounted transaction which would be there, or the cash which would be there. And in case if this becomes evident, or if this gets identified during a search, then the penalty would tantamount to, this is 135% is the penalty. So I'm talking of a situation where, let's suppose a client has purchased a property for 2 crores. The sale deed value is 2 crores. Let's suppose there is some evidence which is found in his premises where it is found that instead of 2 crore rupees, he has incurred 2.5 crores or 3 crores or whatever it is. Then this additional sum of 1 crore rupees, which is there as unaccounted money, is going to have huge implications for the person who has done it. So cash per se I mean, the government has tried to control the usage of cash for all types of transactions, especially real estate. So all these provisions are some provisions which have got developed during the last 4 or 5 years. And in spite of the fact that the provisions are there for the last 4 or 5 years, still I find that a lot of people are not complying. We still keep on getting a case where there is a search which took place in the premises of a person. Although, I mean, the search was not in connection with the property transaction. But what happens is that he has prepared a full detail of the payment which he has made for a particular property by check as well as cash, and he's keeping that particular details with himself. Now, this can have implication for the seller also, and this can have implication for the buyer also. So this is just for your information and to ensure that you don't land up on the wrong side of law. Now, coming to, this is regarding the cash transactions. Yeah.
So
Tarun, you want to say something?
there are many questions now.
Yeah,
Uh,
okay.
One clarity people want is the cash limit 10,000 what you can spend in cash, 20,000 or 2 lakhs? Because we were aware that below you cannot
20,000.
even spend 20,000 rupees, but you have just mentioned that up to 2 lakhs one can take. So people want a little clarity on that. That can they accept up to 2 lakhs in cash in brokerage?
Okay, so now let us look at
Sir,
different.
just we'll club one more question with it,
Yeah.
which says that if there are two partners in the business and both receive 2 lakh rupees separately, do you want
Okay.
to cover it within this?
Okay, I'll cover this also.
Yeah.
Now, let us try to understand the thing. As far as what we are saying is, if I'm incurring an expense, which I have to claim it as an expense for the purpose of business which I am doing. I mean, I claim it as a deduction for the purpose of an expense which I am incurring. Now, there used to be a limit of 20,000 rupees, which has been reduced with effect from 1/4/2017. This limit has been reduced to 10,000 rupees. That means that 20,000 rupees expense I cannot incur. I can incur only up to 10,000 rupees in cash. This is if I am incurring an expense for the purpose of my business. I can incur my personal expense, any amount, not a problem. I mean, if I'm going to a restaurant, I have a dinner, I'm having dinner there, I get a bill of 15,000 rupees. If I'm not claiming it as a business expenditure, I can pay 15,000 rupees. There's no restriction on that. So 10,000 rupees, exceeding 10,000 rupees, if I incur in cash, this will be disallowed to me as a business expenditure. This is one part of it. Now, the second restriction which is there is in the hands of the recipient of the amount. That means the recipient of the amount anywhere. Now, this does not apply to business. It applies to all types of transactions, that nobody can receive more than 2 lakh rupees for one particular event or during a particular day from a person, or in respect of one event or one occasion from a person. So what does that mean? Now, this restriction is, now why this restriction has been brought about at all? The reason is, first of all, there used to be search in a premises, the cash is found, like what you were saying. So what happens is, the person used to explain कि ये 2 लाख रुपए मुझे मिला था, या 10 लाख रुपए मैंने कमाया था, 10 लाख रुपए मेरी वाइफ की इनकम है, 10 लाख रुपए इनकम है, सबकी 10 लाख रुपए आप टैक्सेबल गिन लो, तो मेरे पास ये 50 लाख रुपए एक्सप्लेन कर दिया. They say nothing doing. So you can't receive cash now more than 2 lakh rupees. You can receive only less than. So if I'm doing any business, or if I am even if I'm not doing any business, I cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees from anybody in cash. This is the restriction which has been imposed on me, right? Now, what is the confusion between 10,000 and 2 lakh rupees? Now, look at it from a business perspective. If let's suppose as a broker, I'm doing this particular business, then अगर मुझे अपना expense pay करना है, I cannot pay more than 10,000 rupees. If I have to receive income from somewhere, I cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees in cash. So they are working on different areas. Say, for example, I go to a jewelry shop to purchase jewelry. Now, this is my personal expenses. I am going with my wife to purchase jewelry, nothing to do with my business, but it is his business. So he cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees from cash from me to sell jewelry to me. Now, as far as his expense is concerned, he cannot incur more than 10,000 rupees in cash. This is for claiming his expense as far as the business is concerned. Is this clear now? I mean, are you able to distinguish between the two?
Yeah,
Yes,
this
sir.
is
Yes, sir.
this is clear. Now we have got so many questions that on this topic we have 31 questions at the moment.
Okay.
There is just, I'll take one more question. It says that if 2 lakhs is taken in cash as brokerage, then PAN details are needed, right?
No, no. Here the thing is that as far as receiving more than 2 lakh rupees in cash is concerned, it is not permitted without PAN details, or with PAN details. There is no. It is not permissible at all. This is one. I think I missed out on Kshitij's question. Kshitij's question was if there are two partners in a firm and
Yes, sir.
both of them individually receive 22 lakh rupees, from whom? Is it pertaining to a one transaction or is it pertaining to
No, separate.
no separate transactions? So you can have you can receive any. I mean, less than 2 lakh rupees, you can have 10 transactions. You can receive say 1,50,000 or 1,80,000 rupees. You can receive 18 lakhs. Not an issue.
Okay.
Now, if let's suppose there is one transaction also, and two people are organizing that particular transaction, and they are sharing this proceeds. So, so what happens there is that if I am receiving 1,99,000 rupees till 1,99,000 rupees, then of course I am on the right side of law. Let's suppose the commission comes out to be 3,50,000 or 3,60,000 is the commission, and there are two persons who are sharing it. Each one of us gets 1,80,000 rupees each. There's no problem, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm a separate entity. The other person is a separate entity. But then if they both of them are partners in a firm, and 3,60,000 is being received in the firm, then there is a problem, because then firm becomes a different entity. Firm cannot receive 3,60,000 rupees. Individually, I can receive 180. My other person who's there in this particular transaction with me, he can receive 180. There's no problem there. But the firm per se cannot receive, even if there are 10 partners in the firm, I cannot receive more than 2 lakh rupees as far as the firm is concerned, because firm is a separate entity. Okay, yeah, Tarun, you had some extra question also.
So two more questions with the same this thing. One is this is by Sunny Shukla. He asks, can he please advise a section in which rupees 2 lakh thing is covered in Income Tax Act for our future reference? Is there any section?
Yeah, the section is 269 ST. This is the section 269 capital S and T. Okay. This is the section which prohibits receiving of more than 2 lakh rupees in cash from a person in a day or for a single transaction. And the penalty is prescribed under section 271 capital D capital A, which is equivalent to the amount of receipt which you have done. Right?
Okay. And one more question is by Jitendra Mahajan. Please let us know the per day cash limit for business purpose. And Ashwin Jainji asks, is there any limit to the monthly petty cash deposits in savings account on a regular basis?
Now, as far as, let's suppose I have a retail showroom in Connaught Place where I'm making cash sales. It's a garment showroom. Each garment is costing say 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 or 1 lakh rupees. I'm making cash sales there. There is absolutely no limit. I mean, I can keep on making sales of less than 2 lakh rupees to n number of customers, keep on realizing that cash, and I can have that cash. I can deposit that in my bank account. There is no restriction there. Now, in what context do we want to know that per day cash limit? Now, per day cash limit would depend upon the nature of person of that person's activity. Because if it's a retail showroom in Connaught Place, it is expected that people would be coming there, making cash payment, purchasing goods from there, and less than 2 lakh rupees, the showroom owner can receive cash, and it is an explained amount, and nobody would challenge that particular kind of a cash. Now, the problem comes if I as a broker, or if I am into a trade where I don't have that kind of a walk-in small customers who are coming to me of 5,000, 10,000, 2,000, 12,000 or whatever the case may be. Then in that situation, if I say that I have received 20 lakh rupees cash today from 15 customers, where from one I received 1 lakh, from the second one I received 1,50,000 rupees. Now here the issue would be that I need to substantiate that particular amount. If I'm not able to substantiate as to from where I have received this amount, then there is a problem. Then the problem would be that the same said amount would be treated as an unexplained amount. And if it is treated as an unexplained amount, I land up paying huge amount of tax on that. So what I had shown you was that there is a tax of 60%, surcharge of 25% on that, and then there's a penalty also of 10%. So effectively, I land up paying 81% of that particular amount as tax there. So this is regarding if I'm not able to explain the cash which I'm receiving. So effectively, there is no limit, but depends on the facts and circumstances of the case. And this 2 lakh rupees is for one event or one transaction. If I'm able to show 10 transactions I've had of 1,80,000 rupees each, and this is the 18 lakh rupees I have received in a day, in a particular day, that's fine. That's good enough. But then it should be from different persons. If it is from one person, then I should not receive more than 2 lakh rupees in cash. I cannot receive from one person. Okay. Should I proceed, or you want to put another question, something here?
So the question which I asked earlier was that how much cash we can take on a for a business for a day. He just put a clarification. Please let us know the per day cash spending limit by one organization for business purposes.
No, as far as per day spending limit is concerned, there is no limit. I mean, I have to spend less than 10,000 rupees in cash. Now, if I am, let's suppose I have 50 employees. Now, I'm paying them 20,000 rupees each. Now, I pay weekly salaries. So for that particular week, the salary of the person is 8,000 rupees. I can pay 8,000 rupees to 50 employees, not an issue, because the limit is 10,000 rupees. I'm paying less than 10,000 rupees to each of the employees. So it is very well within that particular limit of 10,000. Less than 10,000 rupees, I can spend any amount. If I have justification for that, if it is, I'm able to show that yes, it is a genuine expenditure, there is no limit on that particular thing. But then each individual expense or each individual payment cannot exceed 10,000 rupees. That is the problem.
Fine, sir. I think let's go ahead because we've got 43 questions on this only. We have a lot of ground to cover. So I think let's move forward. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So now, now we come to another very contentious issue, and that issue is regarding property transaction taking place at a value which is less than the stamp duty value. Now, this provision has also been there for a number of years, and I'm sure we are all familiar with the basic provision of Section 50C, which provides that if any transaction happens at less than the circle rate, then the circle rate would be deemed to be the value of the transaction. And as far as the buyer and the seller is concerned, in case of both buyer and seller, the stamp duty value would be deemed to be the value of consideration, and the capital gains would be the capital gains as well as the purchase price would be calculated accordingly. Now, earlier this provision was not applicable to companies which were carrying on the business of real estate. That means as a property consultant or as a property brokers, you could sell it at a price less than this. Even this provision has also been brought into the statute now for the last 6 years. That means a builder or a developer of a property or a person who's dealing in property, he also cannot have a transaction on less than the stamp duty value. If he has a transaction less than the stamp duty value, then the difference would be deemed to be income in the hands of the buyer or seller of the property, as the case may be. Now, in the case of such transactions, if you have an agreement, let's suppose what happens in the case of a builder, you book a flat with the builder. Now, the builder has, today he has booked a flat. Now, let's suppose that the flat is delivered post-construction after say 5 or 6 years, and the stamp duty value has undergone a change. Now, what would happen in this transaction? Let's suppose the value of the stamp duty value of the flat, when I booked the flat for 80 lakh rupees. The stamp duty value at that point of time was 50 lakhs. Now, when I got the flat, that point of time, the stamp duty value is 1 crore 50 lakh rupees, whereas I got it only for 80 lakhs. Now, what would happen in that situation? The specific exemption has been provided that if I have entered into an agreement to purchase a particular property and that I have made the payment by means other than cash, then this the circle rate prevailing at the time of agreement to sell would apply. That means in my case, the circle rate would be taken as 50 lakh rupees when I book that particular flat, and the rate of circle rate on the date on which I get this particular property would not be applicable. These are some basic provisions. Now, the similar provision has been brought about in the statute with respect to the buyer of the property also. So now we have a situation, if a property transaction takes place between a buyer and seller at less than the said circle rate, then this difference amount would be added to the income of both the seller of the property as well as the buyer of the property. This is what the provision provides today. The only change which has happened during the last 2 years back was that they have provided a buffer of 5% now. I mean, they have provided a window of 5%. That means if you are doing a transaction at a value which is 5% less than the circle rate, then it will be permissible. That means no adjustment would be made in the hands of the seller of the property. Although same provision has not been brought about in the case of dealers of property or in the case of developers of the property or in the case of buyers of the property, but then similar provision would apply there also. So now this is uniformly applicable now as far as 5% difference which is there in the hands of the buyer or seller of the property. Now, One issue which, now this is a very contentious issue because there will be a lot of people who are, Delhi as well as a lot of places, people are affected. We have a situation in New French Colony where the circle rate is 25 crores, whereas you find you can get a property for 16 crores there. And God forbid if, the things do not improve after this, or the coronavirus takes a toll, then probably the property would be available at even at its rate now. So anyway, so now the thing is that what would happen if you're doing a transaction where you feel that the actual consideration is less than the circle rate? How do you go about it? How do you enter into a transaction? The circle rate is higher. What possibly can you go about it? Now, there is one very good judgment of Delhi High Court. Although the Delhi High Court, the petition was filed in a different perspective, but Delhi High Court suggested a way out of the situation. And initially, yes, this was being followed, and although the law stands today also, but even in spite of that, not many people are taking benefit of this particular judgment. Now, this case started like this, that a person wanted to sell his basement of a residential house property. Now, the value of basement, which was considered in Delhi, was the same value was taken as the other floors. So they filed a writ in High Court that the stamp duty value is wrong. So the basement cannot have the same value as a upper floor. So this is how the dispute went before High Court. There were different matters. The High Court clubbed all those cases together and took it up together and termed it as a Manu Narang versus Lieutenant Governor of NCT Delhi. Now, Delhi High Court suggested a way out. Delhi High Court said that under 47A of the Stamp Duty Act, the registrar cannot refuse registration of a property if if your actual consideration or the stamp duty which you have paid on the transaction is less than the stamp duty value. Say, for example, the stamp duty value of the property is 1 crore rupees. You are actually purchasing that property for 80 lakhs. Now you prepare a sale deed for 80 lakh rupees, pay stamp duty only on 80 lakhs, and go to the sub-registrar. Now the provision, as per what was happening up till now, was that the sub-registrar refused to accept that particular sale deed altogether. They say that we cannot register the stamp duty. You have to pay as per the 1 crore rupees, you have to pay the stamp duty. Now here the Delhi High Court said that the sub-registrar cannot refuse. He has to accept that particular document. He has to register that particular document. And then he has to refer this particular document to the controller of stamp duty for considering whether what is the correct stamp duty on that. This is what they said. Now here the people who had moved the petitioner said that we'll have a same problem. Controller of stamp duty is going to reassert the same thing, 1 crore rupees pe aap stamp duty dijiye, and then again we'll have to come to High Court. High Court said, come back again. We'll give you relief at that point of time, but let the at least controller of stamp duty decide this particular issue, whether the 1 crore is the correct stamp duty value of that property or not. So what happened there was that when this judgment came, a lot of people filed their property documents at less than the stamp duty value, and controller of stamps accepted a lot of properties at a lower value than the actual stamp duty value of those properties. This is what happened post this Manu Narang's case. So in other words, if you have a transaction today, you can very well give it a try under these provisions, because this is a Delhi High Court judgment. You have nothing to fear. And if you're genuinely having a transaction, obviously you may not be able to manipulate in situations where the consideration is not fully accounted for. I'm not referring to those cases. But a case like, say, New French Colony, 25 crores is the circle rate. You know the property is available for 16 crore rupees, or the similar kind of situation is there in, say, Panchil Park also. The circle rate is way above the market value of the property which is there. So you can enter into a sale deed, get it registered, file it with the controller of stamp duty, and contest this particular amount. And if this controller of stamp duty accepts your value, then as it is also, your this income tax provision also gets overruled, in the sense that 50C would not be attracted in such a situation, because 50C talks of stamp duty value, and if the stamp duty value itself has been reduced, then of course there is no problem as far as the income tax is concerned. Any issues in this? Okay, then we also have a situation. Yeah,
sir, now is it 5% or 10%? The difference between the value and your
yeah, I think this is Finance Act 2020. They have increased this 5% to 20% to 10%. Yes, you are right. So this is a recent change which has been made. It has been increased to 20%. I'm sorry again. The Finance Act 20 has increased that to 10%, which was 5% earlier. It was 5%, but now it has become, with effect on 1st April, it has become 10% now. Okay, now in addition to this, sorry. Okay, now Moreover, the provisions of Section 50C, they do not apply to tenancy rights, because tenancy rights is not transfer of an immovable property. It is only transfer of tenancy rights. And more importantly, it does not apply to transfer of leasehold rights also. Now, leasehold right means basically properties like we have properties in Noida. Now, a lot of properties in Noida are leasehold. Now, there, the provisions of Section 50C would not apply, because there is no transfer of property per se taking place there. There is only transfer of leasehold rights which is happening there. And these provisions will not get read. Provisions of Section 50C will not get attracted there. What would happen to a situation where I'm transferring a flat which is still under construction? Let's take the facts and then try to understand this particular implication. Let's suppose I booked a flat in April 2010. Now this booking, I transferred this in June 2012. The flat has not yet come into existence. Let's suppose the flat comes into existence in 2014 and then sale deed is registered in August 2014. Let's suppose I'm transferring this flat on June 2012. Is there any application of circle rate in the hands of the seller or in the hands of the buyer applicable when I'm purchasing a flat like this? Now, please remember, if I'm purchasing a flat from a developer or a builder, the provisions apply. But if I am a person who had booked a flat and now I'm transferring this particular booking, will this provision apply here? Now, to my mind, this provision is not applicable on transfer of a flat, because this is not an immovable property as of today. As of today, there is no immovable property which is in existence. This is only a booking. So the provisions of Section 50C, 43C, or 5627 do not get attracted here. Now, there will be certain implications which we'll see as we proceed further. We'll see. So this is primarily because all these provisions, 50C, 43CA, 56-10, they are all applicable with respect to transfer of land or building or both. Or this provisions of in the hands of the buyer, they are applicable in the case of an immovable property. So this deeming fiction is applicable only in the case of when the property is there, not with respect to the rights in that particular property, whether those rights are in the form of a leasehold property or with respect to transfer of a flat, which is a booking of a flat, which has not got transformed into a property as such. Now, in addition to that, yeah, please tell me. Yeah,
so going ahead, this 50C in auction sales of bank under SARFAESI Act?
Yes.
What about? So do you want to touch that also?
50C is concerned, if the bank is auctioning a property and there is no bar on 50C being attracted there. As far as 50C is concerned, 50C would not apply in the sense because it is the seller is the bank in this particular case. Now, we are referring to, I think your intention must be to refer it from the perspective of a buyer who's taking this property in auction. A person who's buying the property in auction and he gets it for a value which is less than this, he can always, he's getting it less than the circle rate of the property. He has this defense which he can take before the income tax officer, which has to be accepted, that here the transaction is a transaction which has taken place in a transparent manner with two parties who have no nexus between each other or no relation with each other. So two independent arm's length transactions, this is there. So as a result, the consideration which has been paid is the fair amount, and it is not, the circle rate does not come into play in such situation.
So this has an exception.
This is an exception in the sense that yes, this is a justification which would work before an assessing authority, that this is the fair value at which the transaction has happened.
But in this, one second, sorry. So in this case, the registrar will accept the stamp duty at a lower price than the circle rate in a bank auction.
Yes, the sub-registrar is under an obligation to accept this particular thing, and if he, in case he says that the full value of consideration has not, or the stamp duty has not been paid, you need to convince him that this is an independent transaction between two independent persons in an arm's length transaction, and the property was subject to certain whatever embargoes. So that is why it has been auctioned. So he should do it. If at all he wants, he can refer it to this controller of stamp duty, and controller of stamp duty would probably give you relief in this particular case.
Sir, is there any case reference to a bank auction property yet?
I have not come across any case as yet. I can look for a case. There should be something, but then often I am not having any case on this. I
No problem.
can't recollect to have read any case where this particular thing, but then that is very well justified because there are a lot of, I mean, we have a situation where the person was a tenant in that particular building. The tenancy was in dispute. There was a case was going on for a number of years. Now, after that, ultimately the owner and the tenant, they came into an agreement that, okay, I'll sell this particular property to the tenant, and tenant agreed to purchase that particular property at less than the stamp duty value. Now, this matter came up before income tax department, and there the income tax department did appreciate this particular thing, that 50C cannot have a role to play here because there was already a tenancy right in that particular building which was pre-existing. So pre-existing right was there. Now, so here the stamp duty value may not reflect the true value of the property. So this has been accepted by, I think I read this particular judgment. This was one high court judgment which was there on this particular thing. There, yes, I mean the stamp duty, the value, fair value of consideration can be less than the stamp duty value of the property also. This is what was held.
So on this one only, sir. So the controller of stamp duty doesn't accept. What if the controller of stamp doesn't accept? Then what happens? So you've answered that he will have to accept it.
No, he should accept. But then, of course, in our country, what a person should be doing and what he does, there's a lot of gap between that. So he should be, legally speaking, judiciously speaking, he should be accepting this particular thing. But in case he doesn't do that, then of course the relief is there. You can go to the court to take the relief. I mean, you can always petition in the court that, I mean, I have purchased the property in an independent arm's length transaction with in an auction, and the stamp duty I have to pay only on that particular amount. I should not be paying on the stamp duty, and I'm sure the court would definitely consider this, keeping in view that Manu Narang's case, because Manu Narang's case, the Delhi High Court did recognize that there can be a value which is different from the stamp duty value. This was recognized by Delhi High Court. But then they said that instead of giving individual judgments in individual cases, because they had clubbed some 15, 20 cases together, and they said that we evaluate each and every property and we get into that particular thing, it is not the role of the court. So there they said that we are passing a general order which should help in all the cases. So there they did acknowledge that yes, the value of the property can be less than the stamp duty value. Sub-registrar should register that property, and the controller of stamp duty should be the authority who should decide whether it is less or not, or the stamp duty has been correctly paid or not. And they even said that if you don't get justice from the controller of stamp duty, then come back to us. We'll pass appropriate orders in that particular case.
True. Sir, there is one more question from a former student of yours, Pravesh Bhatia. Okay. He asked, what will be the circle rate for a property which one sells before he takes the possession or before he gets registered? Will it be the sale rate or the applicable circle rate? Meaning you have booked the property with the developer before he offers you possession. Suppose I have sold it to Kshitij before the builder could offer us possession, and they are doing a transfer at the builder books. So will that circle rate be applicable in such a transaction? And will the agreement to sell be okay at a lower than the circle price?
Yes, to my mind, it can be less than the circle price. There is no restriction there, because what I'm transferring is a property which is a booking. It has not transformed into a flat, and as such, there is no circle rate for a booking. There is a circle rate for the profit of a flat, but there is no circle rate for a booking of a flat. So per se, there's no circle rate for this, so I can transfer it at whatever price. And you can take an example that, let's suppose when I booked that particular flat for 5,000 rupees, the circle rate at that point of time was 4,000. After 3 years, what has happened is that circle rate has been increased to 8,000. Now I am selling it for 6,000 rupees today. I can sell it for 6,000. The buyer can purchase it at 6,000 rupees. There will be no tax implication there. It's an independent transaction because these provisions do not apply to booking of a flat. To my mind, it does not apply. And there is a judgment of Ahmedabad bench wherein in this Yasin Musa Godil, in this particular case, they had held that the transfer of a booking of flat with the builder is outside the purview of Section 50C. This is what they had held.
So there's one more question from Priya Shah. She asked, in case of below stamp duty transaction, if the stamp duty is paid as per the circle rate, what would be the amount to be considered for capital gains? The actual transaction amount or the amount as per the circle rate?
Now, 50C is about this particular thing only. that let's suppose what has happened is that you have you have sold a property for rupees 80 lakhs. The circle rate of that particular property was 1 crore. Now, the stamp duty was paid by the buyer. Now, he said that I don't want to get into any hassle. I'm prepared to pay stamp duty on 1 crore rupees. The sale deed was registered. You sold that particular property. Now, what has happened is, as a seller, you have sold the property for 80 lakh rupees. The stamp duty value is 1 crore rupees. Now, this is where 50C comes into play. This is what 50C is about. 50C says that instead of 80 lakh rupees, the income tax department is going to presume your full value of consideration or sale consideration to be rupees 1 crore and calculate the capital gains accordingly. This is what section 50C precisely provides. But it also gives you an opportunity that if you say that this value 1 crore is not correct and your value which you have taken is 80 lakh rupees is right, you can dispute this thing before the assessing officer. So now what happens is that you have in your income tax return, you have a column. So what happens is, in such a situation, if you are agreeable with by allowing the department to adopt 1 crore rupees as your value, then you fill it in the return, take 1 crore as the base of calculating your capital gains, pay capital gains and forget about the transaction. So everything comes to an end. Now, the second situation is that if you don't want to accept this particular 1 crore rupees, that this is not the right amount, I have received only 80 lakh rupees, so why should I pay tax on 1 crore rupees? So I dispute this particular amount. I make a disclosure in my return that I have sold a property for 80 lakh rupees, circle rate is 1 crore, but I want 80 lakh rupees to be adopted as for the purpose of computing my capital gain. So I put that particular 80 lakh rupees there. So now what happens? Now the department would take it up for scrutiny. They'll give me an opportunity to explain. Now, if I give an explanation to that and the assessing officer is satisfied that yes, okay, this is 80 lakhs, then of course, I mean, he can accept my 80 lakh rupees contention and the matter comes to an end. Otherwise, if he does not agree with my contention, then he needs to refer it to the departmental valuation officer. So he'll refer that property to the departmental valuation officer. Now the ball gets into the court of the departmental valuation officer now. Now the departmental valuation officer now would decide what is the fair value of that particular property, and the assessing officer will have to compute that particular capital gains accordingly. Let's suppose now assessing officer, the departmental valuation officer, let's suppose departmental value officer says that it is 80 lakh rupees. Then of course your contention is accepted and the assessing officer would compute the income accordingly. Let's suppose the departmental valuation officer says that it is 90 lakh rupees. Now what value would be adopted? Now, although the 50C is silent on this particular issue, but then keeping in view this, justification of this particular referring it to departmental valuation officer, 90 lakh rupees should be taken as the value for the purpose of computing capital gains. On the other hand, let's suppose the departmental valuation officer says that the value of this particular property is 1 crore 30 lakhs. So in that particular case, still 1 crore would be taken as the value for the purpose of computing capital gains. This is what the law is. So I'm sure that should clarify the question now.
Fine, sir. Thank you. Let's move forward.
Yeah. Sure.
We'll need to cover a lot, so we'll restrict our questions to this much.
So now, just small thing I'd like to add here. Now, this is when we are talking of circle rate and the consideration. I mean, the same example, let's suppose we are talking of 1 crore and 80 lakh rupees. Can we have a situation, because Delhi, of course, in some areas, still the gaps would be substantial. Can we have a situation that I purchased a property for 80 lakh rupees, the circle rate is 1 crore. The income tax officer tells me that, okay, I don't accept this particular 1 crore also because I know the fair market value of this particular property is 2 crores. So I'll adopt 2 crore rupees for the purpose of computing capital gains in your hand. Can he possibly do that? Now here, there are Delhi High Court judgments on this particular issue wherein they said, now, what can be the situation here? He refers it to the departmental valuation officer. The departmental valuation officer comes up with a value which is 2 crores. So he says that I'll adopt 2 crore rupees because I know 2 crore rupees is the fair value of this particular property. So I'll compute 2 crore rupees as the value. Can he possibly do this? The answer is no. But then we have a different situation. Let's suppose what happens is that there is a search in the premises and an agreement to sell which is found, which is showing that 2 crore rupees has been the transaction of the property, or search takes place. The cash is found in the premises of the seller, wherein he has cash which he is not able to explain, and which he, during that search, He admits that yes, this is the cash which I had received on sale of this particular property for rupees 2 crores. I had received this 1 crore rupees. Now, what would happen in that situation? In that situation, of course, it is different. I mean, then in that particular case, it can still be assessed at 2 crore rupees. But merely on the basis of value ascertained by the departmental valuation officer or the fair market value, the assessing officer is not empowered to go beyond circle rate. So he cannot go beyond the stamp duty value. This is what these judgments said. Now, okay. Another situation which has undergone a change during the last couple of years is the shares of a property company. Now, is this of interest? Should I discuss this, or do you want to skip this? The situation is that a lot of properties were purchased in the name of a company, and instead of transferring the property, what used to happen was that the shares of the company are transferred to alienate the property, or for a transfer, the shares are transferred. And this was a very common practice in commercial properties, or which have to be developed, or Noida, this was a very common practice. So a lot of industrial land is purchased like this in the name of companies and so on and so forth. So now what used to happen earlier was that if you have a property, but then with effect from 1/4/2017, there is a change. Now here what has happened is that in the hands of the both transferee as well as transferor, they say that property will have to be the value of shares will have to be computed by taking the value of circle rate of the property. That means stamp duty of value of the property would be taken. Now let me explain this by an example. Let's suppose in the company, there is a land of rupees 10 lakhs. The book value of the land is only 10 lakh rupees. There is paid up capital of rupees 10 lakhs. So that means the share is 10 rupees each. There are 1 lakh shares of 10 rupees each, constituting my paid up capital of 10 lakhs, and the land is 10 lakh rupees. This is the only company which is there. The company only has land and paid up capital, and this is the share. Now, before 1/4/2017, I could transfer these shares at any value. That means I could transfer that at 10 rupees, I could transfer it at 20 rupees, I could transfer this at 30 rupees. Now, what has happened is with effect from 1/4/2017, they say that you need to replace this particular value with the stamp duty value of the property. Let's suppose the stamp duty value of this particular property now is rupees 5 crores. So now I cannot transfer these shares at any value less than rupees 500 per share, because I'll have to adopt this 5 crore rupees as the stamp duty value of the property divided by 1 lakh equity shares. So my per share value would now come for 500 per share. So just like we have in property, the same thing has happened in shares also now, that if I transfer these shares at anything less than 500 rupees, what is going to happen is that the difference will be taxed in the hands of the seller as well as the buyer. The difference will become taxable. So this is what the law has become. Now, as a result of this, what has happened is that we do not advise anybody to purchase a property now at a premium by acquisition of shares. So that means if you are purchasing the property at the book value of the shares, that means there is not much gap between the book value and the stamp duty value of the property, then of course you can still purchase shares. But the moment there is a gap between the book value of the property and the stamp duty value, it is not advisable to get into this company purchase. The company purchase although becomes it becomes sort of mandatory in situations where you have a project. That means the project, the permissions, the change of land use, etc., has been taken in the name of a company, and you are taking over a project. Now, there, of course, you don't have any choice because all the registrations, everything is there in the name of the company. So you will have to purchase the shares in that particular case, but that shares you will be doing it only by substituting the circle rate of the property or the stamp duty value of the property and valuing the shares accordingly. Only then you can do it. Now, although it does create a lot of problems. Now, the problem is, let's take this example. I'll just try to show you as to what is the complexity which arises in such a situation. The company is there, share capital is 10 lakhs, the property is for 10 lakh rupees. Now, shares are acquired. It is 5 crores is the value of this particular property. So, as per rule 11 UA, I acquire these shares for 5 crore rupees. So, there is a capital gains in the hands of the seller of shares of rupees 490. Now, let's suppose what happens is subsequently, I want to dispose of this particular property, and the buyer of the property now doesn't want to purchase shares. He says that I want only the property now. You sell the property to me, I am prepared to pay stamp duty, no problems, but then you sell the property to me. Now we have a problem here. The property still remains at 10 lakh rupees in the books of the company. If I'm selling it for 5 crore rupees, although I have not made any gain, this 4 crore 90 lakh rupees would become taxable in the hands of the company again. And there will be although this 5 crore rupees I paid as share value, that would not get adjusted against this particular value. So I don't know whether I've been able to explain this particular transaction or the gamut of this transaction. But the issue here is that transactions of property by transfer of shares has undergone a change, and we must be very particular when we are entering into any such transaction.
Now,
Okay.
sir, there are many questions on this Ready Reckoner thing. What I'll do is we will send you these questions on mail, and
Okay.
at a later date, whenever convenient, if you can answer them, then we can reply back to these particular attendees. Because there are already
Okay.
63 questions, we can't take them, and we have to cover so many things. So we'll make a list and send you some questions, and we
Okay.
can, we can take your answers and give it back to them.
Yeah, we can do that. Either I can reply you on mail, or you can have another question answer. We can have a small session, 15-20 minutes, whenever you're having your next webinar. And in case
Sure.
I'm available during that time, then once I have the questions, I can take it up quickly, and I should be able to answer the questions in that
Sure,
particular.
sure, sir.
Or if
Sure.
we have some
Please
time
go
left,
ahead.
let me know. Okay,
Please go
so
ahead,
now,
sir.
yeah. So now what we see is that there is a lot of change which has happened in the real estate market over the years. The entire gamut of acquisition of properties has undergone a change. A lot of new things are happening. New types of schemes are happening. So now what is happening is that that is raising new types of questions, and new type of situations are arising as a result of that. So now I had taken an example earlier. Now I'll take it in a different perspective now. Now let's suppose I booked a flat in April 2010. Now I transfer this booking in June 2011. That means after 1 year, I'm transferring this particular booking. Will it be deemed to be a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain? Let's suppose I'm making some gain in transferring this particular booking. Obviously, because my period of holding is less than 3 years in this particular case, so it should be taken as a short-term capital gain. This would, of course, be taxable, but it will be taxable as a short-term capital gain. Now, let's suppose I transfer this booking in June 2013. If I'm transferring this booking in June 2013, in fact, it should be June 2012 also. We should have 3 options. So I can't add it right now, but let's consider it if it is June 2012. What would happen in that situation if I'm transferring this particular booking? Now, please understand that the period of holding has been reduced from 3 years to 2 years in the case of immovable property. But this has not got transformed into an immovable property now. This is only a right in an immovable property right now. So this period of 2 years would not get extended to this kind of a sale of a flat. So then we have in June 2013, I sell this particular property. So this becomes a long-term capital gain, and this will be taxable as a long-term capital gain in that situation if I'm just transferring the booking. The booking I'm transferring in June 2013 or 2011 as the case may be. Now let's extend this example a little further. I don't sell this booking. I received the possession in July 2014. I booked it in April 2010. I received the possession in July 2014. The sale deed is registered in my favor in August 2014, and I transferred this particular flat in September 2014. Now my question here is, will it be a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain? I'm sure we all understand the difference between short-term capital gain and a long-term capital gain. Briefly telling you, short-term capital gain is taxable at a higher rate. It is treated as a normal income, so 30% tax slab would apply. The long-term capital gain, the tax rate is 20%. In short-term capital gain, I'm not allowed indexation. I cannot index my property, whereas in the case of long-term capital gain, I'm allowed indexation of the property. I can do the indexation of the cost of acquisition, which I have incurred. I can take benefit of various exemptions. I can purchase another residential house. I can, this 54 EC bonds I can purchase if it is a long-term capital gain. I can reinvest the amount in acquisition of another residential house. This is available to me only in the case of long-term capital gains. It is not available in the case of a short-term capital gain. So now my question here is that I have possession has been received only in July 2014. My sale deed has been registered in my favor only in August 2014. I am selling it in September 2014. Let's suppose I'm making a gain of say 2 crores here. Now, if I'm making a gain of 2 crore rupees here, it will make a huge difference. If it is a short-term capital gain, the entire 2 crore rupees would become taxable at the rate of 30%. So I'll end up paying 60 lakh rupees tax here. On the other hand, if this treated as a long-term capital gain and I'm allowed indexation right from here, then what happens here is that maybe the indexation is, if the property was, say, I purchased it for 50 lakhs. Now, indexed value of this particular property as on September 2014, let's suppose it exceeds 70 lakhs. So what happens is that I have zero long-term capital gain if I do capital indexation, and the cost of cost of acquisition if I index it. So it can make a zero tax liability, or I can have a direct tax liability of 60 lakh rupees. That really depends on this particular question, whether it is a long-term capital gain or a short-term capital gain. Now here, this particular question, first of all, came up before the Gujarat High Court in the case of Jindas Bachchan Gandhi. Although this case was pertaining to membership of a society. But in this particular case, Gujarat High Court said that the transfer when we are making, the transfer must be correlated to the date of acquisition of the right therein, because this is a case of transformation of a right. Now, from April 2010, I had a right for in a flat. Although the flat was not in existence, my booking gave me a right in the flat. This right got transformed into a flat in July 2014. And this, once a sale deed is registered in my favor, it is only a formality. So it should be taken as from 2010 to 2014. So it should be deemed to be a long-term capital gain. And I should be entitled to benefits of all the benefits of a long-term capital gain should be available to me. Now, I think this is one kind of a situation which a lot of people ask me this particular question. So this is being subsequently followed by other high courts also. In fact, Punjab and Haryana High Court has also followed. Then in the case of Vinod Kumar Jain, there are other tribunal judgments also where this judgment of Jindas Bachchan Gandhi has been followed. So any issues in this or any questions in this?
There is one question. Sorry, I missed. It's already gone up so much. 1 minute. Mr. Avi Manchanda is asking, is there any surcharge on long-term and short-term capital gains?
Now, as far as short-term capital gains is concerned, it is taxable as a normal rate. It is a normal rate applies in the case of a short-term capital gains. That means you can be in any of the slabs. So it will be taxable as a short-term, normal tax rates, which is there, which is 30% plus surcharge. So if it is more than 1 crore rupees, the effective tax rate comes to something like 42.74%, I think is the effective tax rate which will come to if it is a short-term capital gain. Now, as far as surcharge is concerned, yes, there is definitely surcharge on the long-term capital gain also. It is a little lower. So it keeps on varying from year to year. So I would not be able to precisely tell you how much is the surcharge, but the tax rate is 20%. Surcharge keeps on varying from year to year and from income to income. But then, yes, the maximum slab which is possible as far as short-term capital gain is concerned goes up to 42.74%.
So, okay, just to recap here, when we book an apartment, the date of booking is taken as the date of acquisition. So even if the registration is later, we still compute the period from the date of allotment letter, right?
So allotment letter means wherever I get the right in that particular property. What is important is the date on which I'm getting the right. So what happens is that allotment letter, if it is now, we have to see. I didn't want to get into too much technicality here, but then a number of builders, they used to issue provisional allotment first. And then what used to happen was that subsequently when 10% payment or a certain milestone was reached, after that they used to enter into a builder-buyer agreement. So the point of time when I acquire this particular right, that means if you look at the old cases, what DLF used to do when they were operating in places like Delhi, GK2, there were instances where for GK2, a person has paid 5,000 rupees for a plot. They have issued a receipt, no allotment letter. Receipt also does not contain any detail that it is with respect to this particular plot. There's only noted with them, there is no builder-buyer agreement. This receipt remained for 15 years. This receipt continued as a receipt only with no right in the flat. The DLF mutual understanding between DLF and the buyer was that yes, this is with respect to this plot number. They must have mentioned it in their records, but then the buyer did not have any right. So the point here is that, as Tarun, what you have concluded is the date on which I acquire this right, if the allotment letter is there, which contains a flat number, and I have a legal right for that particular flat booking, I get a legal right for that particular booking. From that particular date, my date of right would be counted and indexation would be allowed from that particular date, right? Okay.
So taking in between, sir, so we consider 2 years as a long-term tax
Yeah.
gains.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, the period of holding has been reduced from 3 years to 2 years. There's one
2
slide of
years.
that. I'll just come to that particular thing also.
Sure, sir.
Okay. So now the issue, one issue which came up was that if I do a booking of a flat, am I entitled to exemption under section 54 or 54F? Is it considered as acquisition of a new residential house? The house is not in existence as yet. Maybe the construction has also not started. I just go to, suppose I've sold a property in Delhi. I go to DLF. DLF is going to launch another project, say sometime later, or he has already launched a project. It is only land right now. No flat has been constructed up till now. And I just book that particular land and I make a payment of say 5 crore rupees or 2 crore rupees or 3 crore rupees to DLF. Will it constitute to be acquisition of a new residential house, and will I be entitled to exemption under section 54 or 54F? Now this issue came
Very
up.
common, sir. Very common.
Yeah. So this is obviously this is an acceptable situation. Now this issue came up before Delhi High Court in the case of Kuldeep Singh, and Delhi High Court said that there is a situation is changing. This is the manner in which the properties are being acquired today. So I think it is an acceptable form of acquisition of property today. So it should be, I mean, the exemption under section 54 or 54F should be available. Subsequently, other tribunals are also following this. But Kuldeep Singh's case, Delhi High Court was a very good judgment by Justice Muralidharan. He said that, I mean, this has to be taken as acquisition of new residential house. Secondly, a lot of houses or flats are being purchased by taking home loans these days. The issue which arises is, if I transfer this particular property, will this interest which I paid on the home loan, will it be allowed as a deduction to me? Will I be allowed as a deduction when I'm computing the capital gains on this interest which I'm paying? Now the interest which has not been claimed. Now, if you all know that 1,50,000 rupees, if it is a self-occupied property, then up to 1,50,000 was allowed to me, then it has been increased to 2 lakhs. So now this some interest was allowed to me while computing my income from house property earlier. So now here, the Delhi High Court again held in the case of Mithilesh Kumari, whatever interest component for which you have not taken benefit up till now should be taken as a part of your cost of acquisition. And while computing capital gains, your cost of acquisition should be increased. That means you should be given the benefit of this interest. Okay, this is something I think just a passing mention of that. Okay, now as far as this residential house property is concerned, now if you have transferred a residential house property, can you purchase more than one house? Now, up to 31st March 2014, there was a lot of litigation with the department, but then yes, the courts settled this particular principle in favor of the SSC that you can purchase more than one residential house. Now, what has happened is that 31st March 2014, Income Tax Act was amended, and they said that they restricted it only to one residential house. You can purchase only one residential house. Now, with effect from 1/4/2019, a small change has been made, and what they have said is that in case your capital gains do not exceed rupees 2 crores, the SSC can acquire 2 residential houses to claim exemption, and this option of 2 houses can be exercised by him only once in his lifetime. So I'll just repeat. The question here is, if I've sold one residential house, let's suppose I've sold one residential house in Delhi, I want to purchase 2 flats in Gurgaon. The issue is, can I purchase 2 flats in Gurgaon? Now, issue here is that with effect from 1st April 2014, this was not permissible. Only one flat was entitled to exemption. With effect from 1/4/2019, they have again amended the provision. And the amendment is, if my capital gain is less than 2 crore rupees, then I can purchase 2 properties and claim exemption under section 54. But then this exemption of 2 houses can be availed by me only once in my lifetime. Is it clear? Any doubts in this?
Clear, sir.
Clear, sir.
Okay, so Then we have, what is a residential house which I'm purchasing? Can I have a situation, like let's take an example of Delhi. Now, I have a big family. I earned a capital gains by selling a property. Now, I want to purchase 2 floors in Delhi because I have a big family, or even if it is not a big family, I want to purchase 2 floors in Delhi and use them as one residential house. Can I possibly do this? Can I combine 2 residential units into one and use it as one residential house? Can I possibly do this? Now, this question came up before Delhi High Court in the case of Geeta Duggal, and Delhi High Court said that the residential house can consist of more than one residential units. So 2 floors, I mean, you can have an independent house. You can purchase a house which you can construct 4 floors, and this can be one house for you. House can be as small as a 25 square yard or a 50 square yard house. House can be as big as a 2000 square yard house. So depending upon the needs of that particular family or the person, you can have the size of your residential house, and it can have more than one residential units. They can still continue to remain one residential house. A little technical,
but here you're trying to say, sir, I'm sorry for interrupting. Here you're trying to say that it has to be in the same dwelling unit.
Yes, there has to be in the same. I mean, we can't purchase it into
adjoining or the same.
Adjoining, or if you can use it as one unit, of course, then of course it can be termed as one unit.
Okay.
But then I'm not talking of that example where the capital gain was less than rupees 2 crores and I'm purchasing 2 resident. If capital gains is less than 2 crores, I'm permitted to purchase for once in my lifetime. I can purchase 2 independent residential houses also.
Okay.
This is in case my capital gains is say 10 crores. Now 10 crore rupees, I want to purchase 2 floors in say this defense colony or Greater Kailash if I want to purchase, or South Extension, I want to purchase 2 floors. So in that particular case, still 2 floors may constitute one residential house depending upon the case, but then they have to be together. I mean, they have to be unity of structure, or they can be used as one residential house. Only then they would qualify as one residential house. I cannot do like this, that I purchase one DLF Crest and then I purchase another property at say any other housing which is say Camellias, or I purchase Aralias or anything like this. Those two may not qualify. So those two is possible only if my capital gain is less than rupees 2 crores. Only then in that particular case I can do that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, now TDS provisions, I think by and large we are all familiar with. There has been tax on rent. I mean, wherever the companies have been paying rent exceeding rupees 20,000, they have been deducting tax on that particular rent. Now, there's a provision which came a couple of years back. In fact, it is quite some time now. That provision is also there now for 4 or 5 years now. Now, what happened was that if, let's suppose, a salaried employee is there, he has taken a premises on rent, he's using it as his own residential house, and he's paying tax of say 1 lakh rupees per month. So does he need to deduct any tax? He is not an income tax. He's not doing business at all. Let's suppose he's working for a company. He's a salaried employee, and he has taken a house for his own personal rent. Now, new section was introduced under section 194 IB. Now, to my mind, this particular section has a lot of people are still non-compliant as far as this particular provision is concerned. Now, this section provides that even if I have taken a premises on rent for my personal use, even if I'm not doing business, this can be a situation that I may not be working also. I can be a retired person and have taken a premises on rent of rupees 1 lakh per month. I may not have any source of income also. Maybe my children settled abroad are giving me funds, or settled in India are giving me funds for payment of the rent. Whatever the case may be, now the Income Tax Act now provides that 5% I have to, if the payment is being made to resident, then 5% I have to charge this tax on this. And this 5% tax I have to deduct on this, and I have to pay it before 31st March of that particular year. I need to pay this particular amount. Any issues in this?
So what we are doing is we'll take some questions a bit later, because otherwise you will not be able to complete the presentation.
Okay.
And
okay,
so since you are on TDS, we would also like you to discuss TDS on sale of properties by non-resident Indians, because that's a very contentious issue at the moment. some of us may not be clear on that. So in case you can just briefly cover that as well, that'll be nice.
Okay, Charlie, I'll discuss it along with this particular thing only. This was on rent part of it. Now, similarly, if I'm paying any rent to a non-resident, even if it is less than 50 lakh rupees, the provisions of Section 195, that means for a non-resident, the tax needs to be deducted while on payment of rent to a non-resident. A lot of cases would be there where the property is belongs to a non-resident. He has given it on rent, and the tenant is paying rent to him. Now, in case the rent is being remitted to him or it is being deposited in his account, then the tax has to be deducted at the rates in force. And rates in force means that we'll have to compute his tax liability on this rent and deduct the entire amount from him, which will come out to be something like 23-24% effectively. So including surcharge, every amount will have to be deducted, and we'll have to deposit that particular amount. Every month we'll have to do that in the case of a non-resident if it is a rental income. Now coming to property. Now the property is, as far as sale of a property is concerned, now Income Tax Act, let me give you the background of this particular thing. The idea is that if a person is non-resident, he may be outside the jurisdiction of India, and the Indian government may not be able to access him once the money goes to him. So there what happens is that the Income Tax Act contains provisions that if I'm making any payment to a non-resident, I am under an obligation to deduct withholding tax from that to the extent of his income tax liability, because that non-resident may not be in India. He may have become a citizen of some other country. He may not come back to India at all. So in all those cases, the responsibility has been cast upon the person who's making payment to a non-resident on any account. Now, let's suppose there is a non-resident person. He has a house property. Let's suppose he has a house property in Defense Colony. Now he has moved abroad. He is in US. He has settled in US. He has become the citizen of US. Now he wants to sell his property in Defense Colony. As a buyer of the property, what do I need to do? Now, if it is a normal purchase of a property from a resident, then I deduct 1% tax, that is under Section 194 IA, and 1% tax I deposit, and 99% of the amount I pay to him. After deducting 1%, the balance amount I pay to the seller of the property in India. But if it's a non-resident, then I am under an obligation to deduct the full tax which is due. Now, full tax means what? Let's suppose there is a long-term capital gain. If it is a long-term capital gain, then the tax rate is 20%. There's a surcharge of 10%. And then in addition to that, there is a cess of 4%. So effectively, if the tax rate is, if the taxable income of that particular person, non-resident in India, is less than 1 crore, then effectively the tax rate comes to 22.88%, which I am under an obligation to deduct. On the contrary, in case his income is more than rupees 1 crore, sorry, if the income is more than rupees 1 crore, then because the surcharge is higher, then in that particular case, the effective tax rate comes to 23.92%. That means, if let's suppose somebody is purchasing that Defense Colony property for rupees 20 crores, they will be under an obligation to deduct this particular tax at these rates from that non-resident and pay only the balance amount to him. Now, there are 2-3 issues which arise as far as this non-resident is concerned. Now, the non-resident, first of all, may say that I am not liable to that much tax. In that situation, he can file an application before the assessing authority to obtain a deduction of a certificate of lower deduction of tax from the income tax department. In that particular situation, the buyer of the property, he would be given a certificate by the seller, and whatever rate is given by the income tax department there, he can deduct that much rate. Otherwise, he has to follow the normal rate, which is 20% plus surcharge, which is there. Now, how do you compute this amount? Should this amount be computed on the total amount, or should this be computed only on the amount of capital gain? Now, this is again a debatable issue, but then all those payments which need verification or which need to be checked, you, as a general person, as a normal person, you are not authorized to step into the shoes of the assessing authority. So what you can do is that if it is prima facie, then of course you may do that. But then as far as the department is concerned, department says that to compute the tax, either you have to follow the maximum rates or the certificate has to be given by the income tax department. There can be a situation where there is no capital gain, or from the cost of acquisition, you feel that it is being sold at a loss or any such situation. Now, in those situations, there is a debatable question, but then in those situations, you can compute the capital gains only on the gains which are there and not on the total consideration which is being paid. But this is a debatable issue. Okay, now anything with respect to this? Any issues with respect to this non-resident payment to non-resident?
So what you're suggesting is that in case clarity is not there, the buyer should deduct on the entire amount, whatever, 22.88 or 23.92, correct?
Yeah, depending upon if it is capital gain, the consideration is more than 1 crore, then let him deduct at the rate of 23.92%. If it is less than 1 crore, then you can deduct that much amount, 22.88.
So as of now, there are no questions on this. There's a question on for the rental amount for NRI's apartment. Is there any limit of the rental amount? Is there a minimum limit to get the TDS thing, or any rent one has to cut TDS if the owner is an NRI?
Now, as far as non-resident is concerned, the rental income of that particular property is taxable in India. That means rent, the person is resident outside India. He might be following his income tax returns there. Outside India, he might just be following his returns. So, now this, as far as India is concerned, he may have some other income taxable also. So now we are not able to determine as to how much income would he be having. Is he the minimum exemption limit? Is he exceeding that limit or not? So here, what is advisable is that you compute his income, pay whatever tax is due as per on the income which you are giving him, deduct the entire amount as tax. So now there is no limit as such. I mean, there is no threshold limit. So what you need to do is that you need to compute his tax liability and deduct the tax accordingly. So the best way is that whatever rent you are paying to him, presume that is his rent, that is his income, compute the tax and then calculate accordingly.
And so there's one more question. Can someone take the money back, the NRI, without the approval of the RBI after sale of property?
Repatriation.
After repatriation, there's more of a FEMA question. Now, as far as FEMA is concerned, it is permissible that now two types of cases are permissible. One is that if he had acquired the property out of his NRE account, that means at the acquisition of property, he had invested this sum from his NRE account, then of course he can repatriate because the money had come from NRE account.
Without the permission, sir?
Without permission. And second situation is that there is a blanket permission which has been given that in case of inherited properties, if it is being sold, so those properties also, there is a blanket permission which has been given that he can transfer that particular amount. He would still need to go to his, so what happens is that the situation would be like this, that if he has an NRO account in India, so if he has sold the property, he deposits the sale proceeds in an NRO account. The tax has been deducted by the person who has purchased the property. He has made the deduction of tax, whatever due taxes was there. But this person would file his return, pay taxes or take benefit of the tax which has been deducted by the buyer. And if his tax has been paid, then there is a procedure for that. He has to file one's form number 15CA-CB. So 15CA is an online form which is to be filed. The form can be filed after taking a certificate from a chartered accountant, which is 15CB, which is again online, which is to be filed. So the chartered accountant would give a certificate that yes, the taxes on this particular amount has been already been paid. Now this particular form would be filed. You will mention the name of the bank which is sending this particular payment. So then you would give this particular 15CA-CB to the bank, and your bank would remit this particular amount. So there's a procedure which is to be followed, but then yes, it is permissible. Without permission of RBI, the funds can be repatriated out of the sale proceeds of the property.
Sir, we had it was till 5:30. It's already
Okay.
5:30 now.
35. Yeah.
No, I believe you also have to go, but we can still do for 15 minutes if the attendees are interested. So if you want us to continue, we have to still cover collaboration and agricultural land. So please type yes in the chat. Otherwise, we can always come back later. So we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Good, sir. I think
They'll go on.
they want you to continue. In case we can cover the other two aspects, which is wow, so many yeses.
We have more than 80.
Okay.
So, sir, if you can cover the other things also in the next 15 minutes, then maybe, I know you have another meeting at 6 o'clock, I guess.
Yeah, I have a meeting at 6 o'clock. So I'll try to finish off in the next 10-15 minutes. I'll try to finish it off.
Please,
okay. As far as residential house, or as far as immovable property is concerned, with effect from 1/4/2017, the period has been reduced to 24 months. That means, sorry, I think I'll need the connector probably. Just give me a moment, please.
Sure, sir. We are happy to see the involvement. Everybody is so excited to ask questions. I'm sure few of us have got satisfactory answers also.
Oh, you're most welcome. Just give me a moment because I think my battery. I'll need I need to connect an adapter to this. Just
Please,
give me a
sir.
moment.
Take your time, sir.
We have Kshitij, we have 86 open questions at the moment.
I know. I was just going through that.
Impossible to answer all of them. So we'll take these questions and we'll try and revert back to them.
We'll do that.
And to everyone, this recording will be shared today. So you guys can be rest assured it will be mailed to all the attendees who have registered. And obviously these slides are a part of that recording. So don't worry on that.
Plus, once we have the answers back from sir, we'll address to them also.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now this, as far as 12 months is, this 24 months is concerned, the period of holding to classify as a long-term capital asset has been reduced to 24 months instead of 36 months now. And then we have okay. So that's about it. And second thing is the indexation. The date of indexation has also undergone a change. Instead of 1/4/1981, now we are able to do indexation with effect from 1/4/2001. That means we can adopt fair market value as on 1/4/2001 and do the indexation accordingly. Now, another change which has happened, which has been brought about by this Finance Act 2020 is that earlier, this value as on 1/4/2001, I could take it by getting a valuation done from a valuer, registered valuer, and whatever value he gives it to me, I could adopt that particular value for the purpose of computing my capital gains. Now, with the change which they have brought about is that the value, fair market value as on this particular date, should be as per the circle rate of the property. That means as per the circle rate notified for that property, as on 1/4/2001 would be adopted. So value, fair market value would be based on the circle rate of the property as on that particular date. This is another change which has happened recently. Now, as far as collaborations is concerned, collaborations has been an area of a lot of dispute and litigation with the department for a number of reasons, because there was no clarity as to which year it will be taxable, how the tax would be computed and all those things. Now, to a large extent, the thing has been resolved now with effect from 1/4/2017. That means effective from assessment year 2018-19, it has become effective. So as per this this particular change which has been brought about, if I enter into a collaboration agreement now, as per which collaboration agreement I am getting a share in the project. That means, let's take the case of a Delhi property. Now, do we have majority of the participants here from Delhi, or is it from?
So mostly from Delhi, NCR,
but all over the country. Okay. Yeah. So now, what happens is that let's take the case of a Delhi property, because I think the same can be replicated to other cities also. Now, Delhi, majority of the collaboration transactions are happening in this particular manner, that you enter into the landowner owns the old residential house. He enters into a collaboration with the builder. Builder gets 1 floor. He pays a certain amount upfront, and he retains 1 floor. The builder gets 1 floor, and 3 floors. He constructs the entire building, 4 floors, and he gives 3 floors to the landowner, and 1 floor he sells directly. This is what primarily the kind of majority of the small builder collaboration agreements which are happening as regards Delhi is concerned, because Delhi doesn't have huge vast lands, or I mean the kind of transactions which are happening in other cities, maybe I mean Bangalore or Pune or Gurgaon for that particular matter, or Noida. Those kind of collaborations are not happening in Delhi, obviously because the land holding is small, and the restrictions which are there because of DDA, such kind of development has not picked up in Delhi as yet. Okay, so now in such a situation, the new section has been introduced, that is what we term as section 45(5)(a). Now this particular section provides that now this would be chargeable to tax in the year in which the completion certificate is issued by the competent authority. Now to this extent, this is a welcome provision. That means earlier it was the which year this would be taxable. Will it be taxable for the year in which the transaction is entered into? That means the collaboration agreement is signed, or is it taxable in the year in which this the project is completed? Now the clarity has been provided in the statute that it will be chargeable to tax in the year in which it is completion certificate is received. Now the problem which would arise in such a situation is that in Delhi a lot of properties still do not obtain completion certificates. So to my mind, in such a situation, we, instead of going strictly by the language of the act, we need to take it when it becomes habitable, when it is, we obtain that C and D form. In that particular case, it will be taxable if the completion certificate has not been obtained. Second thing is, how do we compute the consideration in this particular case? Now, up till now, the consideration was being calculated as the construction cost of the owner's shares, that means 3 floors which the owner is getting, plus the cash consideration which was there, which I am receiving. Now, if you take an example, it will become more clear. But then the construction cost of the property and cash consideration was taken to be my consideration there, and I used to calculate capital gains accordingly. Now, the problem is, now they say that stamp duty value of his share being in the land and building in the project, and the consideration received in cash would be deemed to be his full value of consideration now. So now let's take an example. Now the example is like this, that let's suppose the land is costing the land cost of the land was only rupees 1 crore. Now the JDA has been entered into. There are 4 floors which are constructed. Developer gets 1 floor, so say 25% of the share. Landowner gets 75% of the share. Cash consideration which is being paid. Now, please do not confuse this cash here. Cash, I don't mean unaccounted, or cash means it is through banking channel. I mean, please don't misinterpret this cash here. Cash is that the consideration which is, this is in kind. I mean, the construction cost in kind, and this is in cash means through banking channels, this 2 crore rupees has been paid. In this particular case also, the landowner will not be able to accept this particular thing in cash at all. So it is cash means only to distinguish it from in kind what is being done. Now let's suppose the development cost of this particular project is 12 crores. Now in such a situation, how do we compute the capital gains in this particular case? Let me try and explain it to you. Now, if the land, let's suppose the circle rate of the land today is 80 crores. I'm taking an example. Let's suppose it's a huge property in, say, West End or Shantiniketan or anywhere. Then the land circle rate is 80 crores. The builder gets 1/4 of this. The owner gets 3/4 of this. So 20/60 is the share in which they are distributing the land. The development cost is total 12 crores. Now 12 crores, the 3 crore development of his own share, that means 4 floors have been constructed. So 1 floor cost which the builder himself is getting is 3, and 9 crores is going to the landowner. And he is paying another 2 crore rupees to the owner. The developer is paying another 2 crore rupees to the owner. Now, up till now, we used to calculate capital gains by calculating like this, that 9 crores is the cost of construction of my property, of the share which I have received. 2 crores I receive it in cash. So 11 crores is my consideration which I have received, right? Now this 11 crores, my cost of acquisition was 1 crore. So 25% of that was deducted from this. So my consideration was 11 crore and I used to calculate my capital gains accordingly, right? So I'll need to deduct 1/4 of my cost of acquisition from this to compute my taxable capital gains. On the contrary, this new section now provides that circle rate of the owner's share plus the cash consideration would be deemed to be the full value of consideration. So in this particular case, post this amendment which has been brought in the Income Tax Act, my total value of my circle rate of the property which I have received now, 3 floors circle rate, I am presuming it to be 69 crores. So 69 crores becomes the 3 floors, my 3 floors ka circle rate. So this is my full value of consideration. 2 crores I received it in cash. So my full value of consideration now becomes 71 crore rupees. And now on the 71 crore rupees, the capital gains would be calculated. This is what the change has happened as far as calculation of capital gains on this collaborations is concerned. In addition to this, there is a 10% tax deduction at source on the cash consideration which is paid by the developer. Now we have seen that what is the government's intention? If you look at it, the government or the department, it is shifting all kinds of responsibility on the persons who are doing the transaction. Now what is TDS? Tax deduction at source basically means that I'm working as an agent of the department, recovering the tax from the SSC and giving it to the department. So here also what has happened is that the Act now provides that 10% tax has to be deducted from the cash consideration which the developer is paying to the landowner. In this particular case, he'll be deducting 10% tax from that. Now, the issue which would happen is that, will it make a huge difference in such a situation? And what would be the taxability in such a situation? Are you with me? Have you understood the question clearly? Have you understood the problem? Now, earlier I could calculate the capital gains at only 11 crore rupees minus the cost of acquisition. Now I have to calculate, this was my earlier method of doing it. And now I have a situation where 71 crore rupees is my full value of consideration. Now, is it beneficial or not? Now, I'll give you a simple solution to this. If the landowner is retaining all the 3 floors for his he's retaining all the 3 floors, can he avail exemption under section 54 on this particular property of the 3 floors which he has got? Now, to my mind, he can do that. So in such a situation, this entire 71 crore rupees will, out of the 71 crore rupees, 69 crore rupees would become exempt under section 54. That means this would be deemed to be investment in the new residential house. And he would liable to pay only 2 crore rupees minus 25 lakh rupees. That means the cost of index cost of acquisition. He'll have to index it, of course, and then deduct that. So in other words, to compare between old and new provision, old provision was not there, but the old method of calculating and the new method of calculating is, if the collaboration is of a residential house property and the owner is not reselling his share, then it is beneficial for him. The new provisions are very beneficial to him because he can claim the entire amount exempt, and the benefit which he would be getting is that if after 2-3 years, if he transfers this particular property, then his cost of acquisition will be taken as 69 crores will be taken as his cost of acquisition. So there'll be no capital gains. So what has happened is that the department has committed a mistake here. Now, there'll be one more issue which would arise here. 54 says that you can purchase only 1 residential house property. Here, the landowner is getting 3 floors. Will this 3 floors constitute 1 residential house, or will this constitute 3 residential houses? This is another issue which would arise. Now, for this particular purpose, we have that Geeta Duggal judgment of Delhi High Court. Now, this Geeta Duggal judgment is precisely of Shanti Niketan only. I think West End or Shanti Niketan, either of the two. So there, precisely in that particular case, this was a situation that 3 floors, the Honorable Delhi High Court said that 3 floors constitute 1 residential house and the exemption should be available. So if it is a residential house and you are able to get 54 on this, then the new provision is very beneficial to you. hardly any taxability would be there, entire amount would become exempt. On the contrary, if it happens to be this commercial property on which 54 is not available, let's suppose you have a commercial plot in which you have entered into a collaboration, or you've constructed this office building or a commercial building, then you have a problem. Now, as far as collaboration is concerned, collaboration requires a detailed discussion. If you want to cover all facets of collaboration, then of course, I mean, if you want to look at the collaboration of full projects, which is there, development projects, which is there, then of course requires a detailed discussion. So probably we won't have time today. It's a separate subject altogether, which needs at least 1 hour of, I think, minimum 1 hour of deliberation is required in that particular case. Okay, any specific query on this, or should I just?
So basically, what we'll do is we already have 100 plus questions.
Okay.
We'll just take a couple of them now, and then we can move forward on this. I think we'll have to have one more session with you. I'm getting WhatsApp messages that let's have one more session with sir. So that we'll plan with you separately. One question is on collaboration. The moment we sign a collaboration agreement, the landlord releases the right in the form of possession of the property because the builder has to develop it. It is said that tax is applicable at that point of time. Whereas you mentioned that tax is applicable when the OC is received or the completion certificate is received. So need clarity on that.
Yeah, this was before the amendment. This was the stand which we were taking. Before amendment, the department used to say that the moment the collaboration agreement is signed, the right in that particular property gets transferred in favor of the builder, and the possession is also handed over to the builder for reconstruction of the property. So the department's view was that the transfer has taken place and the taxability should be at that point of time. Now, we were contesting this particular thing. I have myself argued this particular matter in Delhi, and we have been able to get favorable judgments in a number of cases depending upon the facts of each case. But now this 45(5)(a) now shifts the taxability to the year in which this completion certificate is received. So now this is what I said. When I started with this particular thing, I said that this was one of the areas of dispute which was there. So chargeability to tax in the year in which completion certificate, this is a welcome provision. Earlier, this was a disputed, this was an area of contention with the department. So now this amendment has clarified this particular thing, that it will be taxed in the year in which the completion certificate is obtained.
Fine, sir. Thank you. Kshitij, you have any questions?
Sir, are we left with some more information, or I can ask you a question now?
We have some more information, but I think we don't have time now, Kshitij. So you can ask a couple of questions. And then
you can ask your question, because I think the rest of it may not be very significant also.
Okay, so there are two repeated questions which I'm going through. One is an inheritance. If there is a property which was built in 1950s and it has been inherited, so how would one assess the circle value for it?
If it was 50s, it was built. Now, what you need to do is you need to take fair market value of the property as on 1/4/2001 now. So earlier period you can ignore. So you straight away come to 1/4/2001. Go to a valuer, ask a valuer to value this particular property. So earlier he could take the fair market value of the property arbitrarily by taking that, okay, the rate was so much or anything like this. Now he has to take the circle rate of the property as on 1/4/2001. By adopting that particular circle rates, he would give you the valuation of the property, and with effect from 1/4 that particular value, you can index it to present value for the purpose of computing the cost of acquisition.
Oh, wonderful. So this clarifies that anything prior to 2001 has to be taken as 2001 as the base.
Yeah, as the base has been shifted to 1/4/2001 now. So base 1/4/2001 you will be taking, and the value you will be shifting to 1/4/2001. Instead of, let's suppose in 50s, the property was acquired for a few thousand rupees, and maybe say another 5,000-10,000 rupees was spent on construction of that particular property. So up to 1/4/2001, you can come back to the circle rate or the valuation of that particular property which is there, and thereafter the indexation is allowed.
Wonderful. Wonderful, sir. Thank you.
Lovely, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, today, just for record, we had more than 300 registrations. More than 200 people joined on Zoom webinar. We had about some more on the Facebook Live. We have more than 120 questions. So there'll be a lot of homework for you to do after this. So we'll be sending you these questions separately. You can take your time, and once you reply, we'll compile them and send it back to all the attendees. So
Right.
I would really thank you and all the attendees. I will let Kshitij do the honor. Kshitij is our president. Kshitij, please.
Thank you.
I think you need to download the questions, because probably once you go out of Zoom, then the questions would be lost probably. I think this is what happened in one of the webinars which I was addressing. So this is the problem.
So would you be sharing this slide with us, sir?
I can do that. I don't know how to do it here, but I can send a mail separately to Tarun, I think.
Sir, I already
Perfect.
have this.
Perfect.
I already have this presentation.
Actually, this
What I'll
presentation you
do is,
already have.
I'll share it with. So once we send a thank you note to all the attendees, we'll share a link to the recording as well as the presentation, sir.
Okay.
So, sir, anything you want to say, sir, before Kshitij says a thank you note?
No, I really appreciate, and I really wonder that in this time also you have been able to get so many participants to listen to a drab topic like income tax. Probably, I don't know. I thought probably it's not a very interesting topic, and especially for people who are not so much connected with this particular directly. I mean, in the sense, it is only indirectly concerned with you people. But then I really appreciate the kind of interest which you have. But then, yes, I do feel that because I have myself done a lot of property transactions, and I've been advisor to a lot of transactions which happen. If the person who's instrumental in getting that particular transaction done, if he is well versed, you really enjoy dealing with him. I mean, it's a pleasure to deal with a person who's knowledgeable and who understands the subject. It's easier to explain. Like, for example, I'll tell you an example that in one of the transactions, they wanted to give a token advance of say 5-10 lakh rupees in cash. They said that we'll give you cash, you give the receipt. I advised my client, no acceptance of cash, no receipt can be given. So he said, the concerned person, he kept on insisting, क्या problem है आपको देने में, हमें कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, आप दे दो receipt, कुछ नहीं करेंगे. I said, yeah. Now, on the contrary, another deal, the person was knowledgeable, and he straight away said, yes, I agree, it should not be done. So we'll not give you cash, we'll either give you a pay order or we'll make a RTGS to your account and then you give us a receipt. I said, well, fine, that's acceptable. So the point is that it adds value to your profession if you are well versed in the subject, because tax or other issues. So I tried to take those issues which were concerning directly, I mean, which would probably you'll be needing in your day-to-day working. So I really appreciate your participation and so much active participation. And I am really thankful to Kshitij as well as Tarun for taking so much pains, because for most of us, it is like a long weekend, which doesn't seem to be ending at all. So I think we've all become very lazy, but to take the trouble of organizing this program is really praiseworthy. Thank you. Thanks a lot for making me.
No, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being available for us and being so nice to everybody and answering every question. Sir, we all this is such an integral part of our trade, and we can choose to ignore. We shouldn't. So good that you came over and you explained most of the things pretty well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tarun. Thank you, Sunil sir. Once again, thanks to everybody who could take out time and join. I think we at APP are doing far better than we were allowed to work on the streets and going to sites and everything. We've compiled a lot of study material. We've compiled a lot of data. We have new members joining every day. Everybody is coming forward and wanting to, volunteer, give input, give ideas, and like I said, my GBM is our backbone. The APP runs on these 18 names. So wonderful. Everybody, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sir, thank you once again. And one request to all the members. We are having one more session this week, which Kshitij will share with you guys on the professional group. So please join in. And thank you for joining in again. Thank you, Kshitij. Thank you, sir. We'll end the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Good evening. Bye.